All right. Good morning, Lauren.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. It's so great to see you. We are recording this on a September morning in 2021, and we're here to talk about the preschool process in San Francisco and a little bit about kind of private school admissions cadence in general. I have known Lauren for many, many years. Since we were both in our early 20s. I think Lauren might have even been a teenager, but pretending not to be. And now she is the director of college counseling at a local private school here in the city. And when I was going through the preschool process, which I was a little bit crazy about. I didn't start when I was actually pregnant in utero, but as soon as they started to seem like they might be formable humans, I started to think, how am I going to get these kids into preschool and out of this house? Because they need to learn from someone other than me. And Lauren was my go-to and gave me so much information about all the schools, all the preschools, all the elementary schools, public and private, and really helped me figure out what would be best for our family. And so this is a question that comes up all the time with friends and with clients. And I wanted to just bring her on for a casual chat about it. Anything you want to add on your background? And, can you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Yeah, so I started out working in my first job out of college was working at a pre-K through 8 school. And then ultimately I moved into doing admission at that school. So I sort of have always been interested in working in schools and helping families and students find their way. But I really began sort of at the preschool kindergarten level. And now I've done college admission and now I work at a high school. So I've sort of seen the full spectrum. And I think preschool is particularly, it feels large because it's the first decision that a lot of families are making for their child or children. And so I think it's always fun to have those conversations because it's the beginning of a many, many, many steps along the way, but you're trying to stay really present at the same time.
Right. And you kind of have a mix of your background is that you've been in education as an administrator, as an admissions person, you live with an educator, you have a child that's gone through this process, and you're also a native San Franciscan.
Yeah, so I have many, many lenses on this. Having grown up here, I work here professionally, as you said, my spouse is also in education here. I have a child, so I come at it from many angles, which I think helps pull back the curtain in a lot of respects. Many schools are amazing. No school is perfect. No, all those conversations that you hope for something amazing for your child or for your family. I think I can see it in a more prismatic way, which is helpful.
And in full transparency, Lauren is also a past client of mine, and I helped them buy their house here in the city, which she is apparently in right now.
I am. I'm still here. Yes. I think I'm in my own house, as far as I know. Yeah.
So let's get started. I think the first thing we were chatting about offline, let's just dig into that, because one of the most frequently asked questions, or I think concerns, is that it's impossible to get into preschool in a place like San Francisco. So is it impossible? Should we be terrified?
It is not it is not impossible. You should not be terrified. That's the first mantra. I think, and as you mentioned, I was saying this when we were getting started, I think there's a real feeling of scarcity that isn't necessarily aligned with the reality. I think many families feel that they want to find the perfect place for their child, for their 2, their 3, their 4-year-olds. And it can make you feel like you're on some sort of hunt, and other people are feeling anxious if you're talking to other families at the same time in that process. So I think there are a few things. I think one is there are many, many, many options, and just to remind yourself of that. I think there are certain schools that probably, for a variety of reasons, get more airtime. That doesn't necessarily mean they are, quote, better schools. They may have certain programs that are appealing, or hours that work for more families, or a great central location, but the program may not be the right one for your family. At the same time, and I was mentioning this to you, I think especially in the last couple of years, because of COVID, there's been a real proliferation of more homegrown programs or programs that are all outdoors, or people realizing, oh, I could do something. So really looking at the full spectrum of what's available feels to me like the best way to start versus thinking, oh, I only have heard of these 3 schools, so these must be the 3 schools where I need to get a slot. So I think that hopefully is reassuring, but obviously there are many steps to figuring out what those schools might be.
Yeah, and that was my experience too, is that once I started to dig into it, there were actually a lot of options. And there were a lot of places that we would have been super happy at. And there were things that looking back that I would have prioritized and such, but you end up in the right, it's kind of the way I feel about real estate actually. It's really competitive to be a buyer here. And if you don't get the house that you want, that can feel horrible. And yet time and time again, I feel like people end up in the home they're supposed to be in for one way or the other. And you know, one thing that we talked about, so I think that there's a myth out there that because you hear it in the news a lot, and it's true that it is very hard to get childcare professionals and that they're underpaid and that there's a real problem in the system. But what I'm hearing from you is that there was actually some growth of new options, whether outdoors or smaller programs that developed since COVID. So that's great. There's more options now. And I would add from my real estate agent perspective that what I've said since, you know, basically the summer of 2020 is everyone's 5-year plan became their 5-day plan. And so there's a trajectory in the city. I'm sure it's true in New York as well and other major cities, but definitely in San Francisco with people who they come here as a young person, you know, they're single, they find a partner, they buy their first place. And then if they're going to have kids, they start their family in the city. And some of them are planning to move to the suburbs or back home to be closer to family anyway. And that usually happens at that fulcrum of going on to kindergarten. And what happened, and then there's other people who are going to stay here and are going to raise their kids here in the city. And usually you kind of know, I mean, there's angst about it, but you kind of know where you're going to end up if you think about it. And what happened during COVID and what's still happening is that, again, it truncated that timeline. So you were planning to go to Burlingame or go back east when kindergarten came, but now you're going when your kid's age 2 or even age 1 or age 3. And so from the preschool perspective, I think it's slightly easier to get into schools now. Those two combinations of things, the real estate patterns, and then also having some more program options. Because once you're into the elementary school years, private or public, unless there's a change in your life and your job and other reasons, you've kind of most likely decided you're going to stay here at least through elementary and be in the city. So there's less churn. Would you disagree to that?
No, I think that's true. I think there's, I think we've all seen it. We probably all have people we know who decide, you know what, we're just going to go back, as you said, from where my family's from, or so there does seem there's a little more wiggle room. And I agree that, you know, people, once you've committed to kindergarten, you can kind of, people tend to stay the course just because they want that continuity. I think for preschool, just to go back to what you said earlier too, if something doesn't feel right, you can change. So this sense that you're sort of, there's this feeling of, I think I have that, you want the plan, probably you see that in real estate. I want to know where we're going to live. This is the neighborhood. This is our school. And sometimes that continues to evolve, and just being open to recognizing that sometimes you want to recalibrate, to me feels like a powerful thing to remind yourself of too.
And kids at that age are quite malleable. They barely remember what they did yesterday.
I will confess, I know this is about preschool, but we drove by my son's preschool, which he loved. We were very happy with the other day. And he said, I don't really remember anything. I was barely there. Like I was only there. He went to a part-time preschool. It was 3 days a week. So he was like, I don't really remember much. And I thought, okay, well, better that than having terrible memories, but that's to your point.
Right, right. And you were driving cross town to get him to the school of your dreams. So, okay. How would you describe the admissions process for preschools here in San Francisco?
I wish I had something more directive. It's varied, it would be how I would describe it. I think there are many different programs that run differently. There are sort of 3 tracks, right? So there's schools that are going to ask you to just let them know if you're interested in the school a few weeks or months before you're enrolling. You plan to enroll, you'll fill out a form, maybe you'll come see it, and that's it. That's probably the most relaxed. There are schools that are much more proactive about asking you to apply, to go through a full admission cycle, probably a full year before you would enroll, have your child, sometimes there'd be an opportunity for them to come see the school, sometimes not. And then there's selective admission, so they have more applicants than they do spots. And then there's a sort of third category that gets mythologized, I would say, where it's like you have to put your name down on a list before, while or before you actually have your child. And if you don't do that, you're screwed. And I would say that is the smallest number, and probably the sort of, as I said, the unicorn version. There really aren't very many of those. I can think of maybe one in the city that has that model. And that isn't to say even that you can't go there. It's just they start taking names earlier, but that to me is the smallest number. And then, I think there's always should be an opportunity, and I don't know how much you want to get into it right now, but to see a school, to visit it, to see what the spaces look like. I'm sure COVID has complicated that in certain ways. But even if it's empty of children, to see, is there, natural light? Like, are the places and spaces you'll be sending your kid or kids every day the places you would want to spend 5 or 6 or 4 hours?
Right. And that's why it is good, if you can, to get ahead of it, but you don't have to. I think last year, at least at our school, there was no on-site visits, but now there are going to be selective on-site visits. And that definitely is helpful. What age does preschool start?
Yeah. So I would say, there's this question of like, sort of, is it a daycare? Is it a preschool? What I would call preschool, the earliest would be 2. And different schools have different cutoffs. So it's worth, without freaking out, if you're curious about some schools or you have some names from a friend, just going online and casually, while you're half watching a show or something, like casually seeing what their cutoff is. So some schools would say you have to be 2 by September 1st. Some schools would say you have to be 2.5 by September 1st or by January 1. So they'll have different cycles. So 2 is a common cutoff, and then there's sort of a 2.6, so 2.6 months, 2 months cutoff, and then 3. And I would say there are some programs where you do need to be 3 to begin. My child was a January birthday, so there were certain programs that he wasn't really eligible for at the point we needed, so those were naturally kind of cut out of the options. But 2 or 3 are usually the sort of big moments. 2, 2.5, or 3.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, we decided to start at age 2, which, looking at them now, I was like, wow, they were really tiny. And so and then a lot of people, when we were at age 3, were starting for the first year. So it seemed like there was a mix of when kids were starting. And then that would mean how many years you're in preschool before you have to think about kindergarten or a transitional kindergarten program, if you're interested in that. So any reassurance, I think we already addressed this, but if you have a 3-year-old or you have a 2-year-old and you're like, oh I guess I need to do preschool, any reassurance about that? Like, what would be your first step? Talking to friends? Or?
So I would probably go, and this is true with any search process, probably with looking for a place to live, for a house, and for school at every level, be it kindergarten or high school or college. I would start with a kind of personal list making of what you really need. What are the hours you need? What's convenient for you geographically? What realistically kind of transportation can you navigate? Because as much as you want it to be dreamy and beautiful, there is a practical reality to this. So I would go through what your hopes really are, and you could get a little more existential, pedagogical. What are there certain values that are important to you? Do you want it to have a social justice focus? Do you want them to have a language exposure? And just put together a relatively loose list of what you want. And then if you have recommendations from people or even just Google searches, that can be a way to do it. There are all sorts of websites, kind of cross-checking what you need loosely with what you're really seeing is available out there. And that will naturally cull that list, because there are going to be programs, whether because your child isn't born in time for the cutoff, or it's too far away, or the hours aren't what you need. So I would start there. Then I would begin to look through that list. And then I would just reach out. Each preschool should have a website or at least a phone number you can call. Some are a little more old fashioned and you have to call. But for the most part, a website. I'd call and say, I'm interested in the program. What is the first step? If it doesn't say that clearly on the website, you do not need to hound people. You don't need to, start to feel like you need to build your child's resume. I mean, these are sort of the horror story versions of it. You have a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. So no one expects you to be able to articulate what their passions are, per se, though they might like a certain thing. And then I would begin to follow exactly what the admission offices say, or the admission person, or the director. Usually sometimes it's just the director of the program who's doing the admission process.
Yeah. And looking back at it, I would say, in those early years, everything takes time. And I have twins, so maybe it's different if you have one, I don't know, but getting them in and out of the car takes a lot of time. All the transitions take a lot of time, and a lot of us have very busy lives on top of that, and you're adjusting to life with kids. So you don't worry if you're prioritizing, or I should say, I'd encourage you to prioritize convenience and geography, because there are good schools all over the city, and that can really make a difference in how your family is going to feel on a day-to-day basis about your experience at school.
Absolutely. I think, and this can be, I think this is a mantra all the way through. Your child's education, your own experience, is you looking at what really works for you and your family, and not worrying as much about what you're hearing for other people. Because if you're not doing that, you're always going to feel off balance or misaligned. An amazing school might be across town, but it just may be such a drag to be doing that commute that it's not worth it for your family.
Right. What was your experience like with your son?
In terms of the search process, or in terms of his preschool? You mean in terms of looking for a preschool?
Yeah.
I did some research. We were living in New York, and we were moving here when he was 18 months. So right before we moved, I kind of knew that we were going to be entering. I just started Googling. I really didn't know. I'd grown up here, but I didn't know the timelines or anything. I was trying to figure it out, just as anyone is.
Yeah.
And I went online and I looked at some programs. I have an education background, but I didn't know some of I figured there were new schools. I looked at the preschool I went to when I realized his age wouldn't align, so that was out. And I started just Googling, San Francisco preschool, progressive, or things like that, or like, full-time, part-time. And I got some names, and then I went on the website and I really just read through and saw if I liked what they were saying about their program. And then I reached out. We ended up looking at a combination of part-time and full-time. We were really lucky. My father was actually our nanny, so we didn't have the pressure that we knew we could count on our childcare as far as he was willing to do it. But I knew we had the option to do part-time care, but I looked at both. We ended up touring maybe 5 preschools altogether. I did most of it. My partner was just sort of like, you got this. There were a lot of people I saw where there were 2 or 3 parents, if there was, depending on how many parents in the family, that were on tours. I went and I saw the schools, and I started to realize it was great to see some schools I didn't like, actually, because I started to realize what was really important for us. I realized natural light was really important to me. There were some amazing schools, and I was like, there's no windows in here. These people seem lovely. This kid seemed happy, but no light. And that kind of stuff was really personal to me. And then we applied, and we got notified we had some options. We were into a full-time program. We got a part-time program that was more part-time than I had hoped. It was only 2 days a week for half a day. Yeah. And then we got another option that I was more sort of in the middle. And I ended up picking the very part-time program because he was quite young. He was 2. And so we stuck with that, and it was all the way across town, and it was lovely, but he doesn't remember it now. I think there was a point at which he was on a wait list, and this would be interesting for people to keep in mind. He was on a wait list for a preschool that was very close to our house. And he got off that wait list when he was in his second year at the preschool he was in. If I had to do it over, I probably would have switched him, and I didn't. I just figured that we're in this pipeline, let's just stick with it. But thinking about it now, I was afraid of that, and I think I shouldn't have been.
Right, totally. And so just to kind of start wrapping up, it sounds like there's some schools that start at age 2, some start at around 2.5, and some at 3. And some of them work on a traditional, if you think of a college admissions cadence, where this would be the time of year to be visiting, and then applications are due in the winter and you find out in the spring. Some are year-round programs that have rolling admissions, and some have a wait list model. Did I miss anything?
No, but I'm glad you highlighted the question of school year model versus year round, and really making sure when you're looking at schools that they're going to have the year round coverage if you need it, or if it's a school year program that there's a summer camp or something to supplement.
That's a very good point. Some of these have nothing available for you in the summer. And so you'll be on your own to figure that out, which might work for your family and it might not. And then also some of the preschools are just preschools, and some feed into a K through 5th or K through 8th program. And so that's another thing to consider if you're looking for that now or not. And I would say, I just lost my train of thought, but that was what I wanted to summarize for people. And again, that there is a school for you out there, and there's lots of schools. My little tip that I'd add is, once you have identified your schools that work for you, see if you do have a personal connection to the community, because a lot of this is about culture, whether they're mission oriented or language oriented or religious oriented. There's lots of different focuses for schools here. But the school administrators, it seems to me from the outside, are looking to attract families that are going to fit in and enjoy it, and have a diversity in the group and lots of other things that they're looking for. So if you have a school that you like and you can find people that who are part of that community, have them put in a good word for you. It certainly isn't going to hurt. You don't want to be that annoying person who's bugging everyone. Believe me, it's the same thing when you're writing an offer on a house. There's a delicate dance as a good buyer's agent on how to be in the mix enough without irritating people. But approach it that way too, if there is something that you're a target that you're focused on.
And I'll add, if you don't have that connection, you're not out of luck either. I think there's sometimes a sense that there's this cabal and people on the inside, and there's room for everybody, for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry if it came off that way. That is very true. I mean, you really don't need to know anyone, and they're looking for good kids and good families to fill the schools. And by good, I mean people who want to be there. And it can be a lot of fun for the kids. And it also takes a lot of pressure off you at home, because you don't have to have every toy. You don't have to have every art project. I'm a working mom. And I'm not that crafty. And it was a big relief for me, because all of a sudden I was always feeling oh, there's, I should be doing this art project and that art project. I have no idea how to do any of this stuff. And now they get to do it somewhere else. And it's nice. It's a relief.
That's the best. You can be and here we have a minimalist.
Yeah. And we didn't really talk about this very much. And neither of us, I think, are experts in this, but the tuition does range greatly as well. And some of the bigger programs do have sliding scale tuition models, and there's different fee structures out there. And so it also encouraged people, what I've heard behind the scenes is, if cost is an issue for you, don't be scared off to talk to the school that you're interested in, because you might be surprised by how flexible things are.
I think that's really important, and I'm glad you named it. At finding out what the cost is. There's also, Preschool for All exists when kids are age 4 in San Francisco. There's actually additional funding available for certain preschools. So schools will advertise, it may be regardless of your household income, that you actually have a tuition break when a child hits age 4. So asking about tuition assistance or financial aid, asking if that's available, and then also thinking over time, if tuition increases, if your schedule gets, if you go from 2 to 5 days, sometimes the tuition will increase, sort of planning out ahead, knowing that if you need financial support to find out if it's a school that can do that, because the schools are thrilled to make it work for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very common. And so I would just leave you with, enthusiasm and excitement as you guys are going through this process. And if you have, like I said, I am by no means an expert in this, but I did do a lot of research and talk to a lot of people, and would be happy to answer questions or go ask Lauren to answer it for me, and I'll get back to you. So thank you so much for coming. Is there anything else you would add at the end, or do you think we covered it all?
I think we covered it all. I think doing your research, asking questions, don't be afraid to ask questions of the schools and of yourself, of what you really honestly want. And hopefully you and your family will have a really positive experience.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Lauren. I'll let you get back to it, and I'll see everyone out there.